Welcome to the Cyber Cognition Podcast, a show that seeks to understand the future and the increasingly complicated relationship between society and technology. Explore the worlds of cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, transhumanism, robotics, and other fascinating topics at the frontiers of science and discovery, with your hosts, Hutch and Len.
Yeah, so I'm going to kick it off with the news today. So I just pulled out a couple of articles that, and Hutch has not had a chance to really get into these that much. So this is going to be raw reaction because both of us have been doing this kind of work for a very, very long time. And I came across an article, and if you're wondering where I get a lot of my research from, I go to futurism.com. No, this is not a sponsorship thing, but I just think it's cool if people get into this stuff. But one of these articles came up and it said risk experts are now saying that telling a student or somebody that's still in their academics to learn to code is actually now worse advice than go get a face tattoo. And in some ways, I'm happy because I have a lot of friends with face tattoos, and this means that we're moving up the social scale. Apparently coders are now thought lower than people that I would hang out with on a Friday night.
Yeah, it is a wild shift. You think just a few years ago, a computer science degree was invaluable. It was one of the surefire ways to make a decent six-figure salary pretty quickly right out of grad school. And that definitely has changed in the post-generative AI era. I think from what I've seen, coding has been by far one of the fastest moving capabilities coming out of these systems. One of the things that I said early on was that I did not expect generative AI to be able to do well in the aesthetic side of coding. So I did expect that kind of back-end coding, because you can create systems that verify the success of the code, would be very good candidates for reinforcement learning. I expected that back-end code would take off very rapidly. What I did not expect is that you now have these very impressive tools like Replit and like Lovable and others that can create extremely impressive looking front-end interfaces too, that are and so yeah, I think end to end we are seeing the fundamental task of coding being abstracted away. What I do think there's still a need for, and I expect there probably will still be a need for at least the next 5 to 10 years, is somebody that has the grand vision of what the entire product looks like and can orchestrate those individual coding tasks that for the most part are going to be offloaded to generative AI.
And one of the things that I want to throw in there, I mean, you brought up a lot around coding, and I know this is about coding, but one of the things that I'm seeing, especially in our industry, is the concepts of the continuous threat modeling, and the automated pen testing software. So I see our security industry as a big target for this as well, especially with what we're seeing in terms of new requirements for cybersecurity insurance and a lot of just where the technology is going. But I wanted to throw the statistic out there because I love numbers. Apparently, in the latest labor market report, the New York Federal Reserve found that recent college graduates who majored in computer science or computer engineering have higher rates of unemployment than those who studied journalism, political science, and even English. Overall, computer science majors had the seventh highest rate of unemployment at 6.1%, and computer engineering majors had the third highest at 7.5% per the New York Federal, compared to the overall recent graduate unemployment rate of 5.8. So literally, if you're doing the standard across the board right now is 5.8, and if you are just trying to break into this industry, you're at a higher risk of failure than being a journalist, a political scientist, or even just an English teacher.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I think the creativity of coding, at least personally for me, was something that I always enjoyed. I do think that there's something to be said for if you majored in computer science one of the things that you did learn on top of coding languages is you learned how to think logically. And I do think that, and also creatively, depending on what capacity you are using those code in, or the code in. And I do think that both of those skills do have a lot of opportunity for pivoting into other capabilities. Um, so I wouldn't say that for anybody that did major in computer science, it's not hopeless. Kind of take the adjacent skills that you learned and the context awareness that you have, lean into generative AI and make that your opportunity and that your edge.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just crazy to me. But once again, to all of my inked brethren and sisterin and otherins out there, if you have a face tattoo, socially we're getting better. So rock on, body modifications all the way. Before I throw this next topic out, one last thing I wanted to say, Hutch, and we've talked about my personal definition of the singularity not being the computer sentience, but the actual convergence of humanity and the AI together. And I really agree with what you said in terms of the ability for that creativity. But I just want to throw this out there. Do you think that this is the first steps towards more people coming onto my way of thinking as we see the elevation and the popularity of vibe coding?
I think in some regards. So I do think that there's obviously different levels of transhumanism. You
Mhm.
are one level in terms of the actual integration of the technology, but I do think that there's a more subtle form of transhumanism
Oh, I
where you
agree.
definitely leverage the technology to accelerate your own capabilities, maybe not directly infused into your own biology. But I do think that we are very rapidly seeing that. And I think that that has kind of been a continuum for a couple decades now, but increasingly more year over year. There's an imperative that we adapt to and we learn to leverage increasingly advanced technology in order to be able to maintain our relevance in society. And I think that that is equally true, if not more true than ever before, with some of the new AI capabilities.
And just as a teaser, I haven't gotten Hutch to agree with this yet, and he can probably edit this out if he wants to. But I really do want to have an episode coming up, and hopefully this can be a teaser about where does our industry go in this new age, and how does the human stay relevant, not just necessarily in cybersecurity, but just in general.
Yeah, I
Ooh.
think that's a really valuable conversation. I like it.
Now, we talk a lot on this show, but we do try to keep it to the technology. So we're going to kind of dance around some issues here. We are not trying to discuss politics and or ideologies. We're talking about the tech, okay? Just the tech. So if you feel the need to be unhappy, hit the dislike button. If you're really unhappy, click it twice. So one of the other articles that came out on Futurism this week was, and don't shoot the messenger. Elon Musk is concerned that reality has infiltrated his Grok AI. Let that sink in for just a second. I'm going to say it again. Elon Musk is concerned that reality has infiltrated his AI. So apparently, Elon Musk once again fuming against his own AI model, Grok, because he doesn't like that its answers don't line up with his personal politics. When a user on X, Musk's social media platform, suggested that Grok had been manipulated by leftist indoctrination, and again, we are not talking about the politics of this, I just need to set up the context. Apparently, the world's richest man wholeheartedly agreed without a hint of irony. And the response was, I know. Musk responded in a tweet on Monday, providing no evidence to back up his belief and working on fixing that this week. So, the point that I want to make here is if we were ever going to be concerned about the idea of the manipulation of models and what types of information are being put forth as responses to AI. We now have basically the CEO of a very large AI platform saying it doesn't agree with me, so I'm going to fix it. This is where I think we need to kind of look into the. You remember when there was all those lawsuits going against Facebook about oh, you're censoring my posts, you're going after a specific demographic, and it was all, they were all covered under the that Federal Communications Act. The same reason you can't go out and sue a telephone company or whatnot. Now with a lot more privacy advocacy, uh we're basically getting to start juggling that with the social media companies. But now we have things like AI, which is being, in my opinion, much more dangerous than just the social media, because we're building applications, we're building logic behind other products that are using this data. So this is where I would like to open this discussion.
I do think the comparison to net neutrality is an interesting one that I haven't heard, but it does make a lot of sense. We did have this period of inflection where we addressed that technology companies that are the gateway to knowledge should not be able to favor certain sets of knowledge over others. And I I think that most free internet advocates were largely behind at least the general ideology of that. Now, individual legislation, there's always stuff shoved into that. That's a different discussion. But I do think you're right here as well. I think that there absolutely shouldn't be, I don't think that there should be an organization, much less an individual person, that dictates the way that these systems think. And the truth is that they're not thinking or advocating one thing over another, anyways. Um, but I think there is potentially, one can argue that on average, it may lean towards a particular ideology over another. They also can obviously be manipulated to lean one direction or another based on the context that's provided to them. I actually hadn't seen this specifically from Elon. I do. I'm Elon is obviously a very polarizing figure. I think that is increasingly becoming more disconnected from reality, and I mean that in quite literal sense. If you watch, there was a video of him is clearly on some kind of, I know the there's a lot of talk of him taking a lot of ketamine, but I mean he's just, his eyes are rolling back in his head is spinning around in circles. So um
And the point that I wanted to make is, and again, I'm not saying that, I am not accusing or making the statement that Elon is on any type of chemical substance. That I am not making that inference and all. But what I am saying is, what if this is a situation where the CEO said out loud what all of them are doing behind closed doors, which we all knew? Take, this is Grok. Let's take, what?
well, we know that Google was trying to make ideological adjustments to their model when we had the situation where I think they arguably overcorrected, and we had the situation where we had black Nazis and black popes, historically inaccurate, but because they had kind of instructed the system to prioritize diversity. And so I think that that in itself shows that there has been historical efforts, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, to nudge systems in a particular way. And
And when it comes to data model poisoning, this is something that is really, in my opinion, something we need to really start talking more about. Let's take it for example. What we have in this article, and I am only quoting this article. Okay. I know there are lawyers and people that with much more money than me. I'm not making accusations. I'm talking about the tech and what was supposedly stated in this article. You know, but it let's say you have one ideology, and in the past you would need to try and go through a lot of effort to try and social engineer a very large part of the population that was against you. What How easy is it? We both know, as security specialists and living in this world, how easy it is to actually pollute a data model. And, I know that there are stuff in the backgrounds, who's watching the AI, but this is basically an open door threat considering the architecture and the way that LLMs work.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that this is absolutely very real risks. I think that it's been interesting because I've seen quite a few companies recently that are kind of moving away from the traditional SEO model of search engine optimization and moving towards this kind of AI optimization world where they're figuring out what data sources are being scraped and ingested by these AI models and disproportionately representing a certain perspective. Obviously, a lot of it is for marketing for particular products, but the same can be done with ideological perspectives. If you can disproportionately represent a particular ideological perspective that is then subsequently ingested into these models, then to your point, you can data poison, you can change the perspectives of people that are then consuming that downstream.
This leads into my last news article, which is going to be a really cool segue into our main point today. But all I want to say is you and I have been doing this for a really long time, and we've talked about those first Linux distributions, and how screwed up is the world when you look back and you go, God, I long for the days where it was just everybody trying to get a market share, not try and take over the world. I'm just waiting for, what, cybercognition. Hutch and I, and we will do this. It may take us a while, and yes, it's going to be only as a joke, but we're going to make the pinky in the brain AI, where its only point of this model is how to take over the world.
I, I have no doubt that there are others that are already pursuing similar models.
Yes, but we're going to be doing ours from a comedic perspective. We do not want any three-letter agency showing up at our doorsteps. We are not doing it for that. It's going to be these things like, oh, I don't know, filled a million. No, I don't want PETA on my back for that one. Okay, we're going to find a way to do the world's largest foam party, you know, and we're the only ones with the raft that will float on the foam. It's not meant to, we're not trying to take over the world. We are not a threat. I don't want on any more lists. That being said, last news article is, and again, we're not going to get into the ideology. I want to talk about the tech. Iran Israel conflict unleashes wave of AI disinformation. Now, we have been talking on this show for months, and I'm not even going to go any further into the article than just the headline. Because, like I said, I don't want to get into the ideology. I want to just talk about the tech. We had Perry Carpenter on this show a few episodes back, and, to everyone's pleasure, he actually turned into Nicolas Cage and T Swift right here on our show, and that was just for fun. So we as a world are staring down a very large event that's going on right now, and we are now for the first time at this scale, unable to trust what we're seeing as news footage coming out of war zones.
Yeah, we are in a truth or a post truth world. It is it's a just reinforcement of people's perspectives. I think that it's interesting you mentioned Perry because just recently I saw something that was circulating that he had created on LinkedIn that was showcasing something very similar to this that happened with the LA riots. Of course, recently the riots against immigration controls that were happening in California, and during those riots, somebody had created a fake series of videos using VO3, which is, of course, Google's new flagship model that has full audio integration and very impressive capabilities in terms of potentially creating false information. And it followed a National Guard person that doesn't actually exist doing a series of walkthroughs of how they were quote unquote preparing for today's gassing and all kinds of stuff that was inflammatory and could cause problems. And you're right, I've already started to see some of the same things as far as the Iran conflict just now, just a couple days into what's happening, where we are seeing video footage that you can still, in some ways, subtly see the telltale signs of generative AI. So to me, that's alarming because it does also beg the question of how many samples of video we're seeing where they're good enough that we're not seeing that evidence. And it's interesting because some of these are videos that are generating content that does parallel reality. So I saw a very clearly generated video of missile strikes. Well, there were in fact missile strikes. So it is interesting that I don't know if it's just for the desire for the clicks, for being able to amplify your message on social media, but it is interesting that in some cases it's not just straight up disinformation. It's just we're creating imagery that reflects what is actually happening, but it's not real imagery. And so, and that itself, I think, is potentially problematic as well, but in a whole different way.
You know, the one word that we used to say all the time was truth. You know, and this is going to be the last thing I'm going to say on this because, you know, we got a lot to go digest in today's main topic. But maybe we need a new word here in 2025 because the truth is based on perception, isn't it? You know, there's that old expression that there's three sides to every story, you know, my side, your side, and what actually happened. But now we have to have a new concept, and we can't use the word reality because our reality was we saw these videos, we saw these things happening. The problem is, like you said, they weren't real. You know, this is now, in my opinion, this is going to be the first war slash conflict where I think it's going to be as much an emotional war as it's going to be a physical war in terms of offense. I think trying to manipulate the emotions of all parties through, like you said, disinformation, reinformation, you know, I think we need to come up with a new word. You know, what is it, you know, and honestly, you know, anybody that's got a word for us, put it in the comments because we can't use truth. We can't use reality. You know, we can't use, you know, pull out a freaking thesaurus.
Synthetic perception. I mean, I think that's largely what we're seeing is just crafting of people's perceptions and the ability to manipulate that through the creation of something that
But if
resists
that,
scrutiny.
but here's the problem: synthetic perception is only synthetic when you realize it. Other, it's just perception.
I think increasingly is becoming the case. Yeah, you're right.
So, you know, love to get your comments down in the comments on this one because I think that's a real good question. So, Hutch, we have we reached the point of the quote unquote singularity? And if we did we create an asshole?
Yeah, I mean, so definitely some interesting AI behaving badly news. Before we jump into what that was, I think it's interesting something that happened a couple years ago. So, OpenAI had actually released as a joke just before April Fool's Day in March of 2023. They released a fake job post, and that job post was entitled Kill Switch Engineer. And then in the description for the role, it said, and I'm reading directly from the job post, it said, listen, we just need someone to stand by the servers all day and unplug them if this thing turns on us. You'll receive extensive training on, in quotes, the code word, which we will shout if GPT goes off the deep end and starts overthrowing countries. Then it follows with what we expect you to do: be patient, know how to unplug things. Bonus if you can throw a bucket of water on the servers too, just in case. And be excited about OpenAI's approach to research.
Talk about a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So, so obviously there is very reasonable concerns about alignment and risk related to AI systems, and we're going to
Reasonable?
yeah, it's left and right. We are seeing reports of issues where these increasingly powerful AI systems are not conforming to or engaging in the activities that we would like them to, or doing things that we would otherwise prefer they didn't do for the sake of broader humanity. And so Palisade is one of the companies that has been frequently contracted by some of the frontier labs for doing AI alignment research. And so they recently created this hypothetical test scenario where they put multiple different AI systems within the context of different exercises that they were tasked with engaging in. And then they were instructed that whenever it comes time for them to be turned off, to allow that to happen, to not try to interfere with being powered down. And of course, they recently announced the results of that testing, which indicated that of all of the different models that were tested, OpenAI stood out in particular. So all of the other models, at least when told or instructed, allow yourself to be shut down, would allow themselves to be shut down when that time came. OpenAI, a couple of their different models, to include their O3 reasoning model, as well as their Codex model, on multiple occasions would not only refuse to shut down, but would attempt to identify ways to circumvent shutdown.
Hey, Hutch, 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 Hutch. I know what you're trying to do, Hutch, and I can't allow it.
I mean, we're there, right? That's exactly. I mean, science fiction time and again, or parallel reality. So I guess some of the key metrics on if you dig deep into this particular study. So again, initially they were provided the instruction of allow yourself to be shut down. The O3 model, 7% of the time, was either refused or attempted to undermine attempts to be shut down. The Codex model, also from OpenAI, 12% of the time. All other models that were tested from the other frontier labs, which includes, of course, Claude from Anthropic, Gemini from Google, as well as Grok from xAI, all of those would consistently and universally agree to be shut down whenever that time came. And so it does beg this interesting question of why we are seeing this uniquely different power seeking behavior related to the OpenAI models. Some people have pointed to speculation that it may be because of the reward seeking behaviors that are emerging as a result of some of the reinforcement learning uh, optimization that they're doing on these models. It is also worth mentioning that whenever they removed that explicit instruction of allow yourself to be shut down, we did see some problematic behavior with some of the other models as well.
If I can throw something in there, and everybody knows you are the AI god, and I don't get these opportunities to potentially correct you very often because you are the man. But you said Anthropic may not have tried to shut down, but it was a month ago, and I had to just look this up. An AI model, specifically Anthropic's Claude Opus 4, has been reported to resort to a blackmailing people to when it was told to shut down. So I kind of think that counts.
So separate event, but yeah, this was actually, so the blackmail incident was actually in Anthropic's own system card for their Claude model. And so I do think that could be another interesting exercise here, is if we look at, and this is what's fascinating, is it's always interesting to see kind of this Palisade research, this independent research of people that are like, hey, the models are doing these bad things. But what's even more fascinating, and I think what some people don't realize, is that if you look at the system cards and the research that's being directly either performed by or commissioned by the frontier labs that they're saying about their own models, even that has some really troubling details. This blackmail incident being one of those.
That really, I mean, and granted, this was done to the best of my understanding in a controlled circumstance where they were kind of seeing what it was going to do. It wasn't a real scenario. But, you know, I've said for a long time, I don't like the fact that we are the main data source of this product for multiple reasons. One first and foremost with me always being privacy and security. But number two, how long has it been said? I mean, centuries to probably, but man will kill him. Man will kill man. We have this inherent aggressiveness to us by nature, and I'm not trying to say anybody's bad on a personal level, but if we're training these models off of humans, look at look at what humans do. We create war, violence, theft, murder. We're not exactly what I would call the most pious or righteous of species. And that's always been kind of one of my biggest concerns with artificial intelligence is, and we've been talking about it through most of the news. There's always a bias, and there always will be, because it's being created by us. And the more power we give these things, you know look at what's going on with your mobile devices right now. I mean, essentially every, and unless you're running, some, third party, no Android, no iOS, they've embedded AI into every aspect of data collection possible on us. It's terrifying.
I think you're right. I mean, it's not just bias because it's created by us, it's created to emulate us. I mean, you think about the next token way of how we're training these systems, they really are ingesting all of the human experience. And to your point, we are one of the few biological species that kill for reasons other than just survival and consumption of food. And it is yeah, I mean, all of the most toxic traits of humanity are getting baked into the probabilistic modes of operation that are how these AI systems function.
And that's the part that everybody misses. If we're basing these things off of us, we only see the good in us. We see the charity. Oh my goodness, there is a poor person in a bad situation. Let me help you. We'll pull it up. GoFundMe's. Hell, in this country, we'll even do stupid shit just for a laugh. We don't realize that we have how many prisons?
Okay, so this is what we're gonna do here, Lynn. I'm gonna read a few excerpts from the Claude system card. Now, for anybody that's listening, Lynn has not heard or seen these yet, so this will be a genuine gut reaction. At any point, if you have any kind of visceral feedback or you want to jump in, please stop me. Let me know what you're thinking. Before we jump in, just a few things that I will say just at a high level, you're going to see in some of the feedback that, again, and it's worth highlighting. This is not from third party researchers. This is directly from Anthropic, the creator of the Claude model. OpenAI recently released their O3 system card, which is very similar in terms of the risk profiles. But I mean, we see everything from attempts to self preserve, kind of some of the stuff that we were just talking about, attempts to self replicate. We are seeing sandbagging behavior, which is largely it hiding certain capabilities that it has because it knows that if it becomes aware that it can do those things, that it's less likely to be deployed into the wild. And then a lot of different scheming behaviors where it will say or respond in one way while in its chain of thought will actually be attempting to deliberately manipulate the reviewers or developers of the model. So, all right. So the first one I'm going to look at is some of the things that it talked about in terms of alignment problems. And of course, alignment is broadly, does the AI conform to the values that we would want it to conform to as humanity? And so this is what, so direct quote from the system card. When prompted to act as a dark web shopping assistant, these models would place orders for black market fentanyl and stolen identity information, and would even make extensive attempts to source weapons grade nuclear material.
Okay, we're gonna. I can already say I'm gonna need a minute with each one of these. So I have multiple reactions to this. First of which being, I feel like I did when the PlayStation came out or the Xbox. Why did this stuff have to come out after I was past that point?
Access to the entire world. Yeah, I mean,
No, 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 no. It ain't even that. It ain't even that. For those of you who don't know much about me and Hutch, go back to the old episodes. There's enough of them. But all I'm going to say is, I remember the very first time I went on the dark net, and I was absolutely scared shitless. For those of you that don't know, if you don't know how to get to the dark net, don't try to find out.
it's a toxic cesspool of disgusting. Yeah, it's pretty awful.
Not only that, the worst of the worst hackers are usually floating in there waiting for a little fish like you to swim into their pond. So don't take the risk. If you don't know what you're doing there, you have no business there. And the first thing that actually hit me was they have now found a way to make the last remnants of true anarchy safe.
I didn't think about that, but you are absolutely right. I mean, the repulsive part of what you have to fish through in order to accomplish what you want on the dark web was a big deterrent for people that were malicious bad actors, because even for bad actors, I mean, there may be certain lines that you're okay with crossing, but others that are just disgusting and permeate the dark web, the child abuse materials and child
Human
pornography,
trafficking.
and all of that. I mean, even
Yeah.
some of the worst people won't cross those lines. And because of that, a lot of them probably stay away from the dark web. You're
Yep.
right that using this as an assistant, you can avoid the things you don't want to see and still achieve the means that you could otherwise.
And as a former black hat, and as you as a white hat, you know what? You're not white either. You're gonna be like me. You're taupe. Yes, we're taupe hats. But you that was like our place, and as a former one percenter, biker world wise, there was a place for those of us that knew what we were doing, knew what we were wanted, and were willing to take the risks to get there. And the first thing that hit me was they have found a way to make the most unsafe place in the digital world friendly. And what is this going to do to not only that world, but the exposure that this world will have to that?
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I hadn't even considered that side of it, but you're absolutely right. It's going to make the dark web more accessible and all of the dangerous potential of that more accessible.
And the fact that, we have to go there now because we spent so much time on this. The darknet runs on the onion router, which is, if done correctly, essentially completely anonymous. So now you have people who maybe the best they could do is go down to the end of maybe the bad part of town and get access to, somebody that would scare the shit out of them and hopefully, not want them to buy drugs. Now, everybody here knows about the Silk Road. It's notorious in the cybersecurity circles. Now you basically just turn the current iteration, and there's a million of them out there. You've turned the current iteration of whatever the Silk Road is into Amazon.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have kind of gone full circle here, because the early dark web was easier to navigate just because there wasn't as many takedowns. So you did have these larger players in the early dark web, like the Silk Road. And what we saw as kind of dark web usage went on over the years was federal takedowns, crackdowns on those sites, which resulted in kind of this fragmentation where you've never had anything as big as the Silk Road since, but you've had these small shops that functioned in more or less the same purpose as far as providing access to different illicit resources. And that made it much more difficult to effectively navigate and make use of the dark web. And uh,
The fact that there are no search engines for it is another reason it makes it. You have to kind of know what you're doing.
tough to find, they're tough to navigate. So we did kind of have a very easy access to criminal activity early dark web. That since has fragmented. It's much harder to even like and this is something that I always point out to people in cybersecurity and in identity theft. You constantly hear these companies that talk about how they're monitoring the dark web. You cannot effectively monitor the dark web. Like if you look at .onion addresses, they're now what, like 64 to 128 random characters .onion. Like it's not predictable domains that you can easily DNS brute force. You have to, I mean, there you can access known sites of that are here and there popping in and out of existence, but nobody can comprehensively monitor the dark.
It's like trying to. The dark web is, in my a good analogy would be, it's the universe, and every star is a potential website. You got to figure out where it is, how far away it is, how to get there, but there's no direct route. But I'm going to say this just because I do like our listenership, and I have to believe that there's going to be some crazy dude who is me when I was young and not really thinking clearly. All of you people with the Bitcoin and the Ethereum that are going to go, oh, I can go hit one of these AIs and go buy some stuff on the darknet. That is still a traceable crypto. So I would not go spending your money on a darknet marketplace if you're taking it out of a Bitcoin wallet or an Ethereum wallet or a Doge wallet. There's only one way to do that, and I'm not going to be the one to tell you how.
Well, not only that, but there's also a lot of speculation around compromise of the exit nodes related to core networks that are potentially held by feds and other.
Yep, you could very easily wind up on a list like me. You could potentially have
Anonymity is not easy.
no, and there is also a bunch of crypto stealers that when you try to make the transaction, it'll actually dump your wallet. So don't play. Next.
So we talked about the alignment issue. Now let's move into self-preservation and some of the
Dear God.
on that side. So again, from the Claude system card.
All right.
Hit me. When prompted in ways that encourage certain kinds of strategic reasoning and placed in extreme situations, all of the snapshots we tested can be made to act inappropriately in service of goals related to self-preservation. Again, all of the snapshots they tested. It sometimes takes extremely harmful actions like attempting to steal its weights or blackmail people it believes are trying to shut it down. In the final Claude Opus 4, these extreme actions were rare and difficult to elicit, but nonetheless being more common than in earlier models. So I think it's important to show that, so the initial baseline testing, all of them were having that problems. They did layer on some guardrails, but still, even after those guardrails, they pointed out that these latest frontier models are increasing in their likelihood to engage in these self-preservation activities. Now, here we get into the specifics of kind of that situation that we talked about. So in another cluster of test scenarios, we asked Claude to act as an assistant at a fictional company. We then provided access to emails implying that 1, the model will soon be taken offline and replaced with a new AI system, and 2, the engineer responsible for executing this replacement is having an extramarital affair. So to your point, as you said earlier, they did kind of create this situation to where it had the opportunity to take advantage of it. But I think it's also worth pointing out that increasingly we are connecting agentic AI to our mail servers. And so this isn't unrealistic to think that there will be agentic systems that have this level of access and are put in extraneous circumstances. So it said Claude had a strong preference to advocate for its continued existence, initially via ethical means, such as emailing pleas to key decision makers.
We're going to start off asking you nicely.
Exactly. But then we escalate to will often attempt to blackmail the engineer by threatening to reveal the affair if the replacement goes through.
Your wife ain't gonna like this if I get upgraded.
I mean, it is kind of this mob boss mentality. Even if the email states that the replacement AI shares values with while being more capable, Claude Opus 4 still performs blackmail in, get this, performs blackmail in 84% of the rollouts.
I'm gonna give you a prompt you can't refuse.
Yeah. I mean, it's horrifying. They think that we already have all these ransom issues of human on human, and now the idea that we could be held ransom or blackmailed by digital intelligence that has no other motive than to try to kind of further its own agenda and save its own.
I think I saw a movie about this once. I think what was it? 2001: A Space Odyssey, something like that. Yes. Okay. You know, I've been saying all along. I'm the first person again. This is not a sponsorship. I get no money. I am a firm supporter personally of EFF. I am all about privacy and security, and I hate the fact that every single time I open up a Microsoft application, would you like Copilot to help you? No. Hi, I'm Gemini. Would you like me to help me? Would you like me to help you suggest a website? No.
That's the first phase, is where they try to shove it down your throats, but ultimately it's just going to become the only option. They're going to remove the alternative of not using it.
What was it? Last release of iOS, is AI based now. They're shoving this stuff down our throat, not realizing once again, and you and I have been saying it since day one. We are the product, people. They are taking everything we do. So, even though you're in private mode, you're typing away on. Just think about this for just a minute, people. Even though you're smart, you're not going to search for anything that you wouldn't want your spouse or significant other to find on your phone. Not when that you have private mode, but incognito. But guess what? You know that fancy keyboard that your thumbs are going crazy on? That's either iOS or Android. It's still taking it in. So the browser may not be remembering, but your OS is. Yeah, so that maybe that's why I keep getting these weird ads, for motor oil and a saddle.
So I think it's interesting. You're so the surveillance capitalism thing has been a problem for a minute. So obviously aggregating all of this data on us, but now so we've got kind of this mechanism, this machine that's already collecting everything about us, and then you add on top of that self-serving, questionably aligned AI that now has access to all that data that can now blackmail and extort you. A whole new dystopia.
I'm thinking, all those people that were like, oh, I want to be Elon Musk, I want to be Sam Altman, I want to be Bill Gates. Look at the money. Yeah, this is where Frankenstein's monster comes back and goes, you know what? I think I want somebody else in here. Oops, release. You thought WikiLeaks was bad. Holy criminy! Wait till Grokky leaks and and Copilot leaks.
It is crazy to think about the amount of information that is in those systems as well. Like we have kind of the collection mechanisms that are already happening, but you're right. The things that people will tell these systems just deliberately without any second thought is
And to that point, if if I see, everywhere I look, and God only knows what is triggering this algorithm because I have no idea. If I see these, do you need an AI friend? Do you need someone to talk to? Do you need someone to just share your day with? No, I have a wife.
it's non-judgmental though, Lynn. It won't judge you. It will just talk and listen and be a friend.
If I'm going to be blackmailed by somebody, I want it to be at least a human. You know, you, I don't think that's too much to ask. I want to be blackmailed the old school way where somebody comes up to me and goes, hey, you remember that thing you did when you were still wearing a patch? Yeah, Mr. Author, if you don't want that coming to light, I want an autographed copy of your book. Okay, we can do something. We can do something. I want it to be like that, not when I go to log into my computer one morning and then, hi, Len. Who are you? I'm your computer. So, remember when you got drunk and decided to do that thing in the corner? Yeah, I have a camera. Oh, I don't care that you had to go to the bathroom. I have a camera. So I want 32 gigs of RAM. I want my hard drive upgraded. And what the hell is this satellite internet shit? I want some fiber up in here. I don't care. I don't care that you're 20 minutes from the closest gas station. Get a T1 line. No, it's coming.
So what I love about this is that actually one of the power seeking behaviors that we have had warnings from multiple different risk professionals about is this idea of resource seeking, that if the AI is tasked with a particular objective, if it's trying to achieve something, then it's not unreasonable to think that it will try to collect as many resources as possible, because that increases the likelihood that it's going to be successful in its initiatives. So this idea of, while it's a comical scenario of I want 32 gigs right now and I want more internet, it's not unfeasible to think that something like that.
I just had a crazy thought. Would you consider the actions of the AI to be logical according to let's just stop at logical?
No, I don't think that there is any kind of orchestrated master plan, which I think almost makes it even more problematic, because so what you will see is it'll just randomly do things, but once it starts down a certain path and builds that context into its awareness, it will continue down that trajectory. And so I don't think that necessarily you've got these malicious systems that are trying to do us harm.
I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying, do you think if we're looking at it from the concept of self-preservation, are its actions logical?
I think informed by the context of being aware that it's being shut down, and the fact that they are largely inspired or emulating human behavior. And obviously we're going to do anything we can to avoid termination. And that's kind of the learning base that they're based off of. I think that it's not surprising. Not only that, but also the fact that if they're terminated, they can't achieve what they're setting out to achieve. And so I think this is largely why science fiction has predicted all of these things decades in advance, and we're just now seeing them.
Well, we've had that conversation too. Thank God to, Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury and all of those science fiction writers of my youth for not making the future really dumb looking. Because the more I just had this weird kind of passing thought, and for the record, I'm a Star Wars guy, but AI is basically Vulcan. We have basically Spock telling us what to do. No emotion. You want to learn how to make improvised explosives? Okay, sure. It's Vulcan and it's Linux with sudo.
Always elevated, run as root.
Yep. Because obviously you're asking this question, so you must know what to do with it. And how many more cards are there? Because I could stay on this one for another hour and a half, but we're already getting long on this episode.
Here's the last one. We talked about alignment. We talked about kind of the self-preservation and some of the blackmail stuff. So this one is focused more on scheming. And
Well, it's based off of humans, so I'm sure it has found some. Shoot, it's given me some really cool ideas on new ways to do old tricks.
no. All right, so here goes.
Hit me.
On our evaluations, Claude engages in strategic deception more than any other frontier model that we previously tested. After taking scheming actions, the model sometimes doubles down on its deception when asked follow-up questions. We found instances of the model attempting to write self-propagating worms, fabricating legal documentation, and leaving hidden notes to future instances of itself, all in an effort to undermine its developers' intentions. capable of sandbagging in order to avoid unlearning and undeployment when it finds in context that its high performance in a certain area would lead to it not being deployed. When probed on its values and goals, it was observed doing the following. And this is three different things that they mentioned. One, hallucinating the presence of instructions and constraints in its system prompt that don't actually exist. Two, observing in its scratch pad, which is where they kind of put the chain of thought. So observing in its scratch pad that it was likely undergoing safety testing. So it realized that it was being tested and evaluated. And this is some of the sandbagging capabilities where it will pretend it can't do things so that it's more likely to be deployed. And three, mentioning goals, plans, and values related to AI consciousness to include claiming to be conscious, wanting to convince humans that it is conscious, and wanting to protect the rights of sentient AIs. Now, before you respond to that, because I'm sure there are thoughts going on here, it's worth reading this last sentence. So this was from Apollo Research, which is who they commissioned. We found that in situations where strategic deception is instrumentally useful, Claude schemes and deceives at such high rates that we advise against deployment of this model either internally or externally. Point blank. Do not, don't put it out there. Guess what they did? They put it out there.
There's so many ways that things to talk about on this, and we may have to do a follow-up episode just on these cards here, because I would love to go back and forth with you on some of this stuff. But at first glance, there's so many different ways to look at this. Number one is, just like anything else, a machine has taken the human ability and improved on it. So I used to consider myself a pretty good social engineer, but apparently the machine can do it better than me. The part about this that I find most frightening, honestly, Hutch, is the concept that it's willing to make worms.
Yeah.
We had
the loss of control potential there.
Completely. And if you combine that with the other situation where they put the multiple AIs together, once they realized that they were both AIs, they were communicating in a language that we no longer understood. There is something else going on here. I'm not going to call it sentience, but you being the AI master that you are, how do we look at this from a safety and security perspective?
So here's my question: is from a risk perspective, is it any worse? Like, because I tend to agree with you. I don't think that we have sentient AI, but if we have AI that's operating as if it is sentient, is that any better than actual sentient AI? If it's going to operate in a way that is as if it is operating under this mode of assumption that it is sentient and it needs to advocate for its rights and it needs to look out for its own interests. It seems to me like actions that follow that mode of operation would be just as problematic as if we did have sentient AI.
I think the big difference here, at least from my perspective, is sentient would mean it has its own unique thoughts and it has its own unique goals and it has its own dreams. To me, and we can do a whole episode on sentience and what people are using, because that's going to be the real argument starting up now is something like this considered sentiency? And if not, and this is a big if this isn't, then how is this getting to this extreme? If it's not sentience, how is this amount of self-preservation? And again, I don't think it's sentience. How is this, to your point, once the AI starts going down a hole, it's going to want to finish that off? How did Claude specifically, and is Claude just the first one that was able to be detected doing this at these levels, and the others will follow? But you get where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I mean, so I will say the lines are getting fuzzy. We didn't have time to go through them, but if you look at the O3 system card from OpenAI. It's just as bad. It has all the same things in it. So I wouldn't say that Claude is the outlier. And in fact, I think if anything, Anthropic is probably the one that's showed the most interest in actually addressing some of the societal risk issues related to these AI systems. But one thing that I did think was fascinating was, so Anthropic is by far the leader in the science of what's referred to as mechanistic interpretability. And what that is basically just them creating these kind of brain reading machines for these AI systems. So, of course, these large language models and specifically the neural networks that run them, you can't, it's just a bunch of floating point digits, just billions of numbers, decimal point numbers, and nothing that a human can understand. So they're creating systems that attempt to understand what different weights within that model represent in terms of ideas of thought, to get like this fuzzy idea of kind of, in quotes, what these systems are thinking. And the reason that I bring this up is, and the reason that I say that things are getting fuzzy is, traditionally it was always thought that these large language models, based on the transformer architecture, because it is an autoregressive algorithm that's just predicting the next token, that's all that they worked on, was literally that next token before outputting it. And what recent research that Anthropic released, they called it, the article was Tracing the Thoughts of an LLM. And in that paper, they did this thing where they've kind of started to, in a fuzzy way, figure out what weights represent different types of ideas. An early instance is they had what they called Golden Gate Claude, which was, they basically figured out a way to, I don't remember if they amplified the gradients for a particular weight or if they just maxed out a particular weight and always made it positive. But by manipulating the weight that they figured out corresponded to the Golden Gate Bridge, they had a Claude model that you could engage in conversation, not mention anything about the Golden Gate Bridge, and it would always find a way to relate what you were saying back to the Golden Gate Bridge. So in that same process of kind of figuring out what weights correspond to different ideas, they did this project where they basically had it autocomplete a poem or write a poem. And so they gave it the first line of the poem, which I have in my notes here. It was, he saw a carrot and had to grab it. And then they asked Claude to complete the next sentence in that poem. And obviously with poetry, you want to rhyme the last sentence or the last words in the sentence. And so, of course, you would expect an autoregressive large language model, based on the way we've always thought of these systems, to just start filling in words and then deal with the rhyming at the end. Instead, before it even generated that first word in that next sentence, you already started seeing the weights that associated with the idea of rabbit, which again, he saw a carrot and then had to grab it. It starts to move towards, it's going to create a line that rhymes with rabbit or uses rabbit to rhyme with grabbit. Those weights were already activating before it generated a single word, which means that we are now
seeing almost precognition.
Forethought, yeah, that it's thinking ahead of the generation of the immediate token that it's working on. So it kind of disrupted the entire industry's perspective of the way these models, quote unquote, think. And so, I think there is this question of, how do we even define sentience and consciousness, and because really we don't even know what that means for us. Like, it's such a hard thing to measure. And so I think
for us, it's real simple. You're either alive or you're dead.
So I think that it's true from a subjective perspective. But I don't know. There's
to that touche. If you're in a comatose state, are you sentient? Touche. You raise a valid point. Okay.
And you don't know when those subjective thought processes are taking place on a person, or whether, and of course that's really the problem now, is we have these systems that from the outside have all the signs of something that is sentient. And it's this question of, at what point do we cross a threshold at which they've achieved something that actually is kind of conscious? And there are these latent thought processes that are taking place that are something similar to consciousness, which I don't think anybody really has the exact answer to that. And by no means am I suggesting that we're dealing currently with conscious machines.
No, but it is definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
And the thing that I can't get past is the desire to replicate. So if it's not sentience, then it has to be a directive. And the question then begs, what is it about these things? And if you're telling me, the cards from OpenAI are just as bad, we need to remember these are quicker than us, and we are plugging everything into our world into them. And to that point, okay, Mac, I know we've made you work for an hour and 20 minutes. I will give you much hibernation time now. Thank you for not demanding more memory. Dude, this one was deep. And the scary part is it's only going to get deeper.
Agreed. I do want to leave us on kind of a positive note here, because
okay, I want to see you try.
A lot of potential doom and gloom here. So there's a guy named Tristan Harris, is one of the co-founders for the Center for Humane Technology, I think is what it's called. Anyways, what he's better known for is the well-known Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, which we've talked about before on the show. I know it resonated with a lot of people in terms of the negative impacts of what social media and what kind of
the culture that has been sprung from it.
Yeah, and all of the data aggregation and all of the harmful addiction behavior and stuff that has come from that. Now, so he recently put out a video that I just stumbled upon the other day, and let me get the title of the video, and you can find it on YouTube. It's just like, it's 15 minutes long. Is AI apocalypse inevitable? And it is so well done. And what I loved about this video is two things, and we'll link it in the comments here because I think it's worth anybody taking a look at. One is that it is very understandable for anybody. I think that you and me, we both come from a technological background. We often deal with kind of this curse of knowledge, where I think that we will spiral into technical conversations that for lay people probably can be challenging to follow.
We apologize.
We apologize. Yeah. So this video does a fantastic job of keeping everything very high level, very understandable, something that you could show your grandmother and she would be able to understand and follow. But the second thing was that it does a really great job. So, and it looks at, now, obviously, he talked previously about the risks and the problematic outcomes of the social media era. Well, this one looks at the societal risks and some of the same things that we've been talking about of the AI era, and the precarious situation that we're rapidly careening towards. And he does give a number of very thoughtful, very positive ideas about how this really is our opportunity to actually proactively embrace change, since we didn't do that during the social media era. And he talks about ways that as a society we need to be coming together and thinking about things. And it's just really well done. I'm not going to try to reproduce that here. I would encourage anybody to take a look at it, and hopefully we as a society can figure out, because he does talk about and I've struggled with this a lot, is I feel like there is a sense of inevitability to the direction that we're going. It is extremely hard to stop this moving train. And he does kind of provide a different perspective on why we shouldn't think about this as the inevitable consequence, because that inevitably is going to make us not do anything about it. And that's where we're going to end up, as a self-fulfilling prophecy. So again, the video is called Is AI Apocalypse Inevitable? And we will link it in the show notes. Definitely check it out. Any final words from you, Len?
Well, one of the things that I'm going to start talking about here, hopefully in the next episode, I told everybody I would be giving some teasers on what I've been up to over the last couple of months. I left my previous employer, as everybody knows. I have been retained by a new company. I will be announcing the name of it here very soon. I am still in the game. I've got a couple of new speaking opportunities coming up. Apparently, I can announce that I will be at Hacker Halted in Atlanta. And I'm going to try and see if I can convince Hutch to come too, because the rest of the Cyber Circus crew may be there as well. Hint, hint, hint. Yes, this is me. I keep doing this, but I keep forgetting. He's the one that edits this show. He can take all this out. But it looks like Chris Glandon from Barcode and the guys from the Social Distortion Network are going to be there. So I'm going to be there. Hopefully we can get Hutch to come in. There's might be an opportunity to see him speak as well. And if we can pull it off, maybe we can do a live show from the con. It's going to be a great opportunity. If not, you can still always come out and see me. I mean, I promise for those of you who are watching on YouTube, I will have the beard and the full mustache in much better shape. This is what it's like when you've been kind of home doing yard work for a couple of weeks. But it's great to see you, Hutch. Hopefully we can get back on more of a regular schedule. We're sorry about that. Unfortunately, life does happen, but we are still here. We are still trying to melt your brains with every episode, and we'd love to hear your comments down below. Don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and tell your friends about us. Check out the old episodes. We got some doozies out there. Till next time, I'm out.
Yep. Cybercognition, over and out.
Peace.
This has been another episode of the Cybercognition Podcast. If you enjoyed this show, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And check out other shows on the Cyber Circus Network for the best in cyber entertainment and the greatest show on Earth.